Devastating tragedy at your child's school was easily preventable. My daughter has been followed home by the same 3 seniors ever since she began her freshman year 5 months ago. The school's only reaction has been a dismissive, "Boys will be boys." Then last Monday, I was at work eating lunch when a flood of panic texts came from Leia. "They're in the girls' bathroom. They're trying to climb into my stall. Please help, Dad. I'm so scared." Overturned my chair standing up, my phone already calling the school as I raced across the parking lot. I reached the secretary's desk. "My daughter is trapped in a bathroom stall with 3 seniors trying to climb in." The secretary hesitated. "Which bathroom?" I turned the key in the ignition and sped off. "3rd floor, I think. I don't know. Just find her." The secretary fell silent. "Her name is Leia Clarks. They are attacking her right now, sir," she began. "Unfortunately, policy requires that I cannot leave the front desk unattended. The principal is also unavailable during her lunch break." I nearly shouted my next words into the receiver. "Are you stupid? What are you talking about? Go to that bathroom now." "Sir," she said as if addressing a child, "please refrain from using vulgar language. They are climbing into my daughter's stall. I'll make a note for the principal when she returns." I hung up, realizing I was talking to an automaton. I hadn't texted in 4 minutes. 8 minutes later, I left my car sideways in the bus lane and sprinted through the school's front doors. The secretary looked up from her computer, starting to speak about sign-in procedures, but I was already past her. I ran to that bathroom faster than I ever have in my life, but when I grabbed the handle, my worst fear materialized. It was locked from the inside. The boys must have gotten a key to lock it deliberately. I pressed my ear to the door and could hear them inside with her. Leia was crying. The sound of tearing fabric reached me, and then her cries became muffled screams as if a hand covered her mouth. I threw my shoulder against the door, but these were the new reinforced steel doors installed after the shooting 4 years earlier. It didn't budge. "Leia, I'm here." I seized a chair from the hallway and swung it with all my strength. The chair shattered. The door remained untouched. The fire extinguisher was heavier. I hammered it against the lock mechanism again and again, metal clanging through the hall. But these doors were performing exactly as designed. By then, the secretary had climbed the stairs, breathless and flushed. "Sir, you are destroying school property. I'm calling security." "Give me the key," I yelled. She flinched at my rage. "I don't have bathroom keys, sir," she said. "Only the principal has those," and before she finished, I was running to the principal's office. Through the window, I saw her at her desk, eating a salad and scrolling on her phone. I pounded on the door so hard the wall shook. She looked up slowly, held up 5 fingers, mouthed 5 minutes, pointed to her food, and resumed scrolling. That's when the security guard appeared behind me, hand on his radio. "So you need to calm down," but I didn't. I grabbed another chair. The principal saw me raise it, her eyes widening. I swung the chair through her window. Glass exploded. Screamed, dropping her salad. I reached through, unlocked the door from inside, blood from glass cuts dripping onto her carpet. "Sir, stop." The guard grabbed my arm, but I shoved him off and went straight for her desk, yanking drawers open until I found the key ring. "You're insane," the principal shrieked. "I'm calling the police." I ran back to the bathroom, keys jangling, leaving bloody handprints on the walls, but the door was already open. The boys were gone. My dear Leia was curled on the floor, her skirt torn, lips bruised, hair matted with a white sticky substance, her shirt unbuttoned and bra torn. I immediately pulled out my phone to call 911, kneeling beside Leia, taking off my jacket to cover her when the principal rushed in with the guard. "You assaulted me," the principal's voice was shrill. "Jim, he could have killed me with that chair." I was talking to the dispatcher, one hand on the phone, the other stroking Leia's cheek as she choked out blood and tears. The principal kept pacing, gesturing wildly. "You've traumatized my entire staff." She pulled out her phone. "Every student on this floor saw you act like a maniac. That's 200 children who will need counseling. The security guard was filming everything. This is going to be on the news," the principal continued, now talking to someone on her phone. "Parent going psychotic, destroying property, creating an unsafe learning environment. Our insurance doesn't cover parental attacks. The superintendent is going to, yes." "Hello," she suddenly interrupted herself. "We have a violent intruder who threatened me with a weapon. She gave my description and called it a premeditated assault. She never mentioned the 3 boys or my reason. When police arrived 4 minutes later, she pointed at me first. That's him, the one who attacked me." 2 officers moved toward me while 2 others went to Leia. The first officer put a hand on my shoulder, guiding me away from my daughter. I tried to explain about the boys, but he said we'd talk at the station. A hand still dripped blood from the glass onto the bathroom floor. Paramedics rushed in and went straight to Leia, still curled on the cold tiles. They began examining her. One called for a gurney as I watched from the doorway, the officer's hand still on me. The principal was loudly telling another officer how I'd gone crazy and attacked her office, pointing at me, using words like violent and unstable while Jim showed the video he'd taken. Nobody asked about the 3 boys or why I'd needed into that bathroom. The paramedics lifted Leia onto the gurney, covering her with a white sheet, her eyes tightly closed. I moved to follow, but the officer blocked me. He told me I was detained for assault and destruction of property. I watched them wheel my daughter away while I stood helpless. The principal kept giving her statement as they handcuffed me in the hallway. Students watched from classroom doors, some recording with phones. Officers walked me past all those staring kids. I caught a last glimpse of Leia on the gurney, a female paramedic holding her hand, speaking softly. At least someone was gentle with her while they treated me like a criminal. They put me in the back of a police car and drove me to the station. I kept asking about my daughter, but they told me to save it for the detective. At the station, they processed me, fingerprints, photos against a white wall. Hands were still bleeding. They had to clean them to get good prints. When they gave me my phone call, I didn't call a lawyer. I called the hospital about Leia, but they wouldn't tell me anything since I wasn't there in person. They only said she was being examined and I'd have to come in for information. I later learned a victim advocate met Leia at the hospital for the exam while I was in a holding cell. This woman stayed with her through the entire process, explaining each step so Leia wouldn't be scared. The evidence collection took hours with photographs and swabs while I sat in custody, unaware. They released me that evening with a citation and a court date for property damage. The desk sergeant mentioned the principal wasn't pressing assault charges at this time, making it sound like a favor. I ran to my car and drove straight to the hospital. I found Leia in a third-floor room, cleaned up, but her eyes were empty. She flinched when I moved too quickly toward her bed. She whispered that I shouldn't touch her, but please don't leave. I pulled a chair close so she'd know I was there, giving her space. We sat quietly until Detective Paula Norris arrived with a notebook. She interviewed us separately, starting with me in the hallway while a nurse stayed with Leia. Gave her the exact times from Leia's texts, told her about the secretary refusing to leave her desk and the principal holding up 5 fingers for her lunch. The detective took notes expressionlessly, but her jaw tightened at the 5-finger signal. She went to talk to Leia. I heard soft voices through the door. A hospital discharge planner came with pamphlets about trauma, therapy, and what to expect. She discussed safety planning and follow-up appointments, giving us numbers to call. My brain couldn't process all the information about counseling and support groups. She talked about normal reactions to abnormal situations and nonlinear recovery, terms that went over my head. All I could think about was getting Leia home and safe. A nurse wheeled Leia out to my car. I helped her into the passenger seat. She immediately curled against the window. We drove in silence for 10 minutes before she spoke. "Don't tell Grandma yet," she said quietly, "or anyone." "Can't handle people knowing." I nodded. The rest of the ride was silent except for her occasional sniffling. At home, I carried her bag inside while she walked slowly to the door. I checked every window and lock. I wedged a chair under the back door handle. I closed all the curtains, though it was still afternoon. My phone showed 14 missed calls from the school. I deleted the contact. Leia stood in her doorway looking at her bed for a long moment. Then she turned and went to the living room. I found her favorite blanket and brought it to her. She wrapped herself on the couch and closed her eyes. Neither of us mentioned school tomorrow. We knew she wasn't going. My phone buzzed with a news notification. The school had released a statement about a violent incident involving a parent describing property damage and disruption. Not one word about the assault. It's flooded in, calling me unhinged and dangerous. People shared the story, adding opinions about parents who can't control themselves. I turned my phone face down, but it kept buzzing. Detective Norris called an hour later while Leia dozed. She explained the interview process would be thorough but slow, and Leia would have an advocate. Her voice was professional but with an understanding tone. She scheduled us to come to the station in 2 days. Next morning, I made breakfast, but Leia only picked at her toast. She returned to the couch with her blanket while I answered work emails. 3 days later, we drove to the police station for her formal statement. The advocate met us in the lobby and introduced herself to Leia. They went into an interview room together while I waited outside. I sat in a hard plastic chair for 2 hours watching the clock. When the door opened, Leia looked exhausted, but the advocate said she did great. Detective Norris told me Leia was very brave. We went home and Leia went straight back to the couch. The next afternoon, a process server knocked on our door. He handed me papers, a no-trespass order from the school banning me from campus indefinitely, citing safety concerns and property damage. The irony of their sudden concern for safety made my hands shake. I signed for it and added the papers to my growing file. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. One had posted a video of me breaking the principal's window, edited to start when I picked up the chair. You couldn't see the principal holding up 5 fingers or hear anything about Leia. The comments were brutal. Parents called me violent and unstable, saying people like me shouldn't be near schools. I deleted my Facebook and Twitter accounts. That evening, my boss emailed about concerning reports he'd received, mentioning conduct unbecoming and reputation damage. Scheduled an HR meeting for the next day. My stomach sank. This could cost me my job. I spent the night preparing documents and timelines. The HR meeting was uncomfortable, full of questions about my judgment. They put me on administrative leave pending investigation. 2 days later, I met with attorney Dimitri Lawson about the property damage charges. His downtown office had leather chairs. He listened to my story, taking notes on a yellow pad. Said we could argue extreme circumstances, but warned the principal had political connections. He discussed plea deals and reduced charges. I wasn't ready to admit guilt for trying to save my daughter, but he said fighting could worsen Leia's case. We scheduled another meeting. Meanwhile, Leia had her first appointment with therapist Samra Green. I drove her and waited in the car. Afterward, Leia said the session involved paperwork and a safety assessment, but Samra taught her breathing exercises for panic attacks and how to ground herself. It was the first time Leia seemed slightly less scared since the attack. She had another appointment in 3 days. The therapy office was quiet with soft lighting. Leia said Samra was nice and didn't push her. We stopped for ice cream on the way home. It felt like a normal thing to do. The house felt too quiet. I kept checking the locks. 3 days later, Cullen Burgess from the district office called. He was the Title IX coordinator and needed to discuss the alleged incident. His repeated use of alleged turned my stomach. I asked what they were doing to keep Leia safe. He said everything had to follow proper process. They couldn't rush to judgment. I hung up harder than intended. The next morning, certified letters arrived saying the 3 boys couldn't contact or come near Leia. At afternoon, Leia's phone buzzed with an Instagram message from a fake account. "You ruined everything." We knew who sent it. I took screenshots and forwarded everything to Detective Norris. She called back 2 hours later with the first good news. School security cameras showed all 3 boys entering the bathroom area right when Leia's texts began. The timestamp proved this happened while the principal was still eating lunch. This showed she could have helped but chose not to. Detective Norris also got phone records from that day. Every text Leia sent was logged with exact times. My call to the school at 12:47 was recorded. The secretary's call to security about property damage came at 1:03, but she never mentioned a student being attacked. Each piece of evidence strengthened our timeline. The detective said this pattern would help our case. Then the sexual assault nurse examiner's report came in. I had to run to the bathroom to vomit. Clinical words describing what happened to my daughter were worse than any nightmare. But Detective Norris said this medical evidence moved everything forward significantly. I tried to sign up to speak at the next school board meeting, but was told I couldn't discuss specific student matters in public comment. I started writing remarks about general safety protocols instead. I had to stay calm and strategic, though I wanted to scream. A reporter from the local paper emailed, asking if we wanted to tell our side after seeing the viral video. I said no, but gave them Detective Norris's contact. Maybe media pressure would force the district to act. Detective Norris called again with more news. The custodian who cleaned that bathroom had come forward quietly. He'd seen those 3 boys hanging around that morning with keys they shouldn't have had. Was scared to speak publicly, but agreed to give a sworn statement. Then Dimitri called with bad news. The principal had filed for a restraining order against me, claiming she feared for her safety. He said this was a tactic to make me look dangerous before Leia's case progressed. We'd have to go to court next week to fight it. After 2 weeks, Leia wanted to try going back to school for 1 class. The counselor said it was a good step. I drove her and walked her to the building. Made it to the hallway outside her math class. Then she froze, smelling the same cologne one of the boys always wore. She couldn't breathe and started crying. I got her out quickly. She sobbed the whole way home, apologizing for being weak. The counselor called later saying setbacks were normal, but it felt like moving backward. That night I sat at the kitchen table reviewing all the evidence, phone records, timestamps, medical reports, witness statements. Each piece told part of the story. School kept saying they were investigating, but nothing changed. Those boys were still free while my daughter couldn't walk down a hallway. The district sent another letter about reviewing policies, but it was empty words. They wanted this to go away quietly, but I wouldn't let that happen. Every day brought new bureaucracy or legal paperwork, court dates for the restraining order, lawyer meetings, forms to fill out. All while Leia stayed home trying to heal. System meant to protect her had failed, and now we had to fight for basic justice. 3 days later, Dimitri called saying the DA wanted to meet about my property damage charges. I drove to his office. He explained they were offering a plea deal for misdemeanor property damage with probation and restitution for the window. He thought I should take it because fighting could complicate Leia's case and make me look unstable in court. I gut wanted to fight, but Dimitri said Leia needed stability more than I needed to prove a point. I signed the papers, though it felt wrong admitting guilt for trying to save my daughter. The next morning, Cullen Burgess called about interim safety measures for Leia's return. They offered schedule changes, an adult escort between classes, and access to a private bathroom. I noted every gap in their plan, fire drills, assemblies if the escort was absent. Burgess said it was the best they could do while investigating, but their best hadn't protected her before. Why would it be enough now? 2 days later, I was loading groceries when a man in a suit called my name. He said he was one of the boys' fathers and I was ruining his son's future over teenage mistakes blown out of proportion. I kept loading groceries, ignoring him. He followed me around the car, saying his son was losing college scholarships and getting death threats online. Threat to sue for defamation if I didn't make Leia drop the charges. I got in my car and started it, but he kept talking through the window about how boys do stupid things and we were destroying his family. My dash cam recorded everything, including when he said his son might have gotten carried away but didn't mean real harm. I drove off while he was still talking and saved the video immediately. At afternoon, the district emailed all parents, calling the incident a student conflict addressed through proper channels. They praised their quick response and commitment to safety without mentioning the assault or that I had to break a window to get help. I started writing a response listing the actual timeline with every text, call, and delay, including the secretary refusing to leave her desk, the principal holding up 5 fingers, and the boys having unauthorized keys. Dimitri reviewed my draft and made me remove parts, calling them incompetent and negligent, even though that's what they were. Detective Norris called that evening with an update. She'd interviewed all 3 boys separately over 2 days. Their stories were completely different. One claimed he was never in the bathroom. Another said Leia invited them in and everything was consensual. The third admitted being there, but said the other 2 forced him to watch and he didn't touch her. Their parents had hired lawyers trying to coordinate stories, but it was too late. Norris already had their first statements recorded. She said the contradictions helped our case because innocent people don't need to coordinate lies. A week later at dinner time, 2 people from Child Protective Services knocked on our door. They needed a mandatory home visit because the case involved a minor. They walked through our house, checking if Leia had a safe bedroom, enough food, and if I seemed stable enough to care for her. It was humiliating, but the caseworker gave us helpful resources for trauma counseling and victim compensation funds. They determined Leia was safe but kept the case open for ongoing support. 3 weeks into therapy with Samra, something amazing happened. Leia slept through the entire night without waking up screaming or crying. She'd been using grounding techniques Samra taught her, naming 5 things she could see, 4 she could hear, 3 she could touch. That morning, she came downstairs looking rested for the first time since the attack. We celebrated quietly with her favorite blueberry pancakes, not talking about why it was special, but we both knew it was huge. Detective Norris called with big news. Gotten the principal's phone records from that day, showing multiple calls during her lunch break that she didn't answer. The records proved she was lying about not knowing there was an emergency. Her lawyer argued the records were private and inadmissible, but the damage was done. Everyone now knew she chose her salad over student safety. The next Monday, Leia wanted to get something from her locker, though she wasn't returning to classes yet. We went early before school started. When she opened her locker, a piece of paper fell out. Someone had written that she was a lying whore ruining good kids' lives. She started shaking, unable to breathe. I took photos of the note and marched to the office, where they finally agreed to install more cameras near her locker and classroom areas. It wasn't enough, but it was more than their previous nothing. The restraining order hearing came the following week. Judge listened to both sides and issued mutual stay-away orders, criticizing both the principal's delayed response and my property damage. She said we both acted inappropriately, though the situations weren't remotely comparable. Dimitri said afterward this was actually good because the judge didn't label me as the sole aggressor, which would have hurt Leia's case. The principal had to stay away from us too, meaning she couldn't testify as easily about my behavior that day. It wasn't vindication, but in this messed-up system it counted as a win. 3 days later, Cullen Burgess called me into an executive session at the district office. He sat with 2 lawyers and admitted the school hadn't followed proper steps when Leia reported the boys following her home months ago. They wanted to avoid a federal complaint and offered mediation instead of court. Burgess rubbed his forehead, looking at papers showing all the times we'd asked for help and been ignored. Lawyers pushed a stack of forms across the table, offering counseling funds and policy changes if we'd sign away our right to sue. I took the papers home to think. But that same afternoon, Dimitri called with news that made my hands shake. Another girl's lawyer had contacted Detective Norris, saying those same 3 boys had cornered his client in an empty classroom last year, but she'd been too scared to tell anyone until she heard about Leia. Statement described the exact same pattern, following her, making comments about her body, then trapping her alone. Detective Norris said this changed everything because now we had proof they'd done this before and the school should have known. She spent 2 weeks assembling a case file thicker than a phone book with witness statements, timeline charts, and security footage from both incidents. She submitted it to the DA's office. She warned that prosecutors never file all charges police recommend, but she'd fought hard. The waiting was awful. After 10 days, the DA's office called Dimitri with their decision. They filed criminal assault charges against 2 of the boys and sent the youngest one's case to juvenile court since he'd just turned 17. Some charges were dropped for lack of physical evidence, but the main assault charges stuck, more than most victims ever see. Same week, I faced my own legal problems with the plea offer for breaking the window. Dimitri said taking the misdemeanor deal would help Leia's case by showing I wasn't a crazy, violent person. The judge would give probation with community service instead of jail time. Standing in that courtroom, admitting guilt for property damage while those boys hadn't been arraigned yet made my throat burn. But I signed the papers and accepted 6 months probation plus 200 hours picking up trash on highways. Meanwhile, the Title IX investigation wrapped up with results that sounded good on paper but felt hollow. The boys were removed from campus temporarily, doing online school while Leia got a tutor to catch up on missed work. The principal was put on administrative leave pending further review. The district wouldn't admit wrongdoing, but their actions said everything their lawyers wouldn't let them say aloud. 2 weeks before the criminal trial started, Leia had to testify at a closed preliminary hearing to determine if there was enough evidence to proceed. Her advocate held her hand the whole time as she answered questions about that day in the bathroom. I could see her shaking from across the courtroom. Defense lawyer tried to confuse her with questions about exact times and why she didn't scream louder, but she got through it without breaking down completely. Afterward in the hallway, she looked exhausted but said facing them made her feel stronger, though every word had been terrifying. That weekend, a reporter published a huge investigation about how schools handle assault cases, using our story without names as the main example. Article had charts showing how many reports get ignored and quotes from experts saying schools care more about liability than student safety. Within hours, the school board announced emergency meetings to review policies, and parents started showing up at board meetings demanding real changes. My boss called me the next Monday, saying HR had reviewed everything and decided on a 2-week unpaid suspension for missing work during the incident and creating negative publicity for the company. Made me sign a performance improvement plan with monthly check-ins. Everyone at work looked at me differently, but at least I kept my health insurance for Leia's therapy bills. The suspension gave me time to drive Leia to her new therapy support group for teen assault survivors, recommended by Samra. I waited in the parking lot while she went inside to a room with 5 other girls who understood without needing explanations. After an hour, she came out with red eyes but a different posture, as if she'd put down a heavy weight. She didn't talk about what happened, but on the drive home, she said one sentence that made everything else worth it. I survived. The other girls had nodded when she said it, and for the first time since this started, she felt less alone. The district's lawyers called 3 days later with their mediation offer. I could tell from their careful tone they wanted this to go away quietly. Wouldn't admit the school did anything wrong, but they'd cover all of Leia's therapy costs, bring in outside experts to review emergency response protocols, and require every staff member to complete 40 hours of training on handling student safety situations. I wanted them to admit what they did, but Dimitri reminded me that getting Leia's treatment paid for mattered more than my need for an apology. I signed their papers with hands shaking from holding back everything I wanted to scream. The next week, we sat with a new counselor specializing in helping kids return to school after trauma. She spread out papers showing different options while Leia gripped my hand under the table. She suggested starting with just 2 morning classes, math and English, with a quiet room available if Leia needed to leave and an adult escort between buildings so she'd never be alone in hallways. His voice was barely a whisper when she said she wanted to try, though her whole body tensed at the thought of walking through those doors again. We practiced the route the weekend before school started, walking empty hallways while she pointed out safe spots, the counselor's office on the 2nd floor, the nurse's station near the front entrance, the library with its back exit for a quick escape. Monday morning came too quickly. Leia put on her new backpack with shaking hands but got in the car anyway. Drove slower than usual, trying to give her more time. The escort met us at the side entrance. A kind older woman briefed on everything, and walked Leia to her first class while I sat in the parking lot for 2 hours in case she needed me. She made it through both classes without calling, though the counselor texted that she'd used the quiet room twice to do breathing exercises when the hallways got too loud between periods. I picked her up at 11:30. She looked exhausted, with dark circles and hunched shoulders, but there was also a tiny spark of pride that she'd done it. We went straight for ice cream, though it was barely noon. She got 3 scoops. I got my usual vanilla. We sat outside eating slowly while she told me her English teacher had welcomed her back without making a big deal about where she'd been. 3 weeks into this new routine, I got an email from the district announcing personnel changes. Buried in the middle was one line. The principal was reassigned to a curriculum development position at the district office, effective immediately. The teachers' union had protected her from being fired, but at least she wouldn't be around kids anymore, stuck in a windowless office reviewing textbooks instead of ignoring students in crisis. Dimitri called that same afternoon. News about the boys' cases moving forward. The youngest one's lawyer wanted to meet about a possible plea deal including court-ordered treatment and permanent restraining orders that would follow him even after he turned 18. The other 2 were still fighting charges, their expensive lawyers filing motion after motion to get evidence thrown out. But the one taking the deal would have to allocute to what happened as part of his plea, strengthening the other cases. Leia listened when I told her after dinner, nodding slowly before saying she felt a little safer knowing at least one of them admitted what they did, even if just for a lighter sentence. Saturday morning, we went to the garden center. Leia picked out a small oak tree, running her fingers over its thin trunk while I loaded soil and mulch into the cart. We dug the hole together in the backyard's corner where it would get morning sun. Neither of us talked about what it meant, just focused on making sure the hole was deep enough and the roots had room. Every morning after that, Leia would go outside before school to water it, standing with the hose for exactly 5 minutes as if it were the most important task in the world. I'd watch from the kitchen window as she tended to this one small thing she could control. 3 months crawled by with therapy twice a week, school 3 mornings a week, and court dates that kept getting postponed. One Tuesday evening, while making spaghetti together, I made a stupid joke about the pasta looking like worms. And Leia actually laughed, not a polite smile, but a real laugh from her stomach. It lasted only a second before she caught herself and went quiet again. But for that one moment, she sounded like herself, the girl who used to sing in the shower, leave her shoes everywhere, and argue about curfew. Now I'm sitting at our kitchen table typing this while Leia does her geometry homework across from me, occasionally asking for help with a problem, though I know she can solve them herself. She's back at school part-time with support systems in place, sleeping through most nights without nightmares, and the boys' cases inch through the legal system. But we don't check for updates every day anymore. We're not over what happened because you don't just get over something like that. But we're living with it, taking things one day at a time, and right now that's enough. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Seriously, life's always throwing lessons at us if we actually stop and pay attention. Until we cross paths again, my friend, if you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.